My name is Brandy Bajalia, and I'm super excited to be here with all of you. It's a great opportunity. I am a multimedia artist, currently sort of working more in installation and socially engaged work. A little bit about me, I feel like my work is very personal, but I also think it relates to everyone. I am from Birmingham, Alabama. My family is from Ramallah, which is a city in Palestine, so I feel like violence is something very connected to sort of my history, and I think about those two places. And my work currently, I can say, is really speaking to a traditional Palestinian textile of embroidery called tatrice. So a lot of my work right now has been about weaving. It's been about cross-stitching. It's been about sort of these historical motifs and this this really amazing practice that's sort of vanishing, right? My most recent piece that I've worked on having to do with this was a site-specific piece at Teachers College at Columbia University, where I was weaving into a large grate with sort of industrial rope, using motifs that I learned from my teta. So a lot of diamond shapes that connect. For me, I like to work in the public, and I like to make things that are sort of big and spectacular and aesthetically like pleasing to the eye, because I feel like it draws on a really large audience. So I'm definitely focused on making work that sort of utilizes something that someone told me about a couple of years ago, and I'm seeing it in my work more often, is soft power. So making work that at first glance is just really beautiful, using things like string and textile, very soft materials, flowers, things that are soft and feminine and fragile, appear to be fragile, and actually speaking to something really large. And you really don't acknowledge it until you get super close and sort of start digging in. So that's what this piece was about. It's titled Habibti, which is in Arabic means like my darling, my sweetheart, and it's kind of just a term of endearment. And then also with this piece, there is a sound installed underneath the grates, and it was a sound piece composed by my partner, which focuses on different sounds layering, so also mimicking what it is to weave with sound. So when you would encounter this piece, not only was it this big, weaving structure, but also sound coming out of it. So that's a recent piece of mine. I think that seems good.
My name is Williamson Brasfield. I'm an artist who mostly works in painting and sound. The work, a lot of different projects, but the work that I was thinking most connects to this topic is a series of paintings that I started for a show at Alejandro's gallery in Nicaragua, where I took the stencils that they sell to camouflage weapons, and use them as a sort of a source for abstract paintings. I'd been thinking for the past few years about this idea of abstraction as camouflage, or like a method of kind of hiding or obfuscating certain sources or source materials, and also thinking about the history of abstraction as sort of a political tool. In the 1960s, of course, like a lot of the international shows of the abstract expressionists were underwritten by the CIA, and this sort of condition of art that's supposedly non-objective is kind of having these sort of secret histories or currents, and also thinking too about the idea of paintings as sort of commodities, and the idea of where money for paintings can come from, and particularly thinking about like early in the Trump presidency, I remember a number of artists were stunned and shocked that their art was in Trump's collection, and they were like, how did this happen? And it's like, well, that's how art sometimes is consumed. You don't really have a choice of where it goes. So I was thinking of all of these sort of histories, and just also on a more personal level, I never met my grandfather, but he was a veteran of several major American wars, and he when he got back from Korea, he bought a Jaguar for himself, and then decided he didn't like the color. And so he repainted it with, he made it halfway around the car, but he repainted it with like little Testors enamels. And I thought about that as like, the way that paint and violence and tragedy and all of that can come into these sort of almost tick-like gestures. And as a way to sort of meditate on the fact that I'm like one of the first men in my family to not be in the army and not to be in this sort of ultra masculine culture. It just is sort of almost like a meditative way to think about a lot of different histories and layers.
My name is Mildred Beltre, and when I was first, asked about this topic to think about interventions into violence through art, I thought of two things. And so I have a dual practice, So one is a studio-based practice, and I'll talk about that first. So in my studio-based work, something that I've been thinking about a lot with my work is the idea is revolutionary thought and revolutionary practice, but how that looks like in intimate spaces. And so, often revolution is thought of as something like it goes out in the street and it's very loud, but what happens between people is what I'm interested in. So I'm exploring that through, and it was interesting hearing you talk about your work, Brandy. I think there's some connections materially. So one way is I've been making these tapestries that have these sort of revolutionary slogans or jokes sometimes too, but there's also like a little bit of a sexual overtone or undertone to them. And so thinking about how revolution and desire sort of commingle, or how those things come together in intimate spaces. And also thinking of what's the emotional life of a revolutionary, right? Like, how does it affect the possibility for finding love or, things like that? Or, what does it look like as you're going to bed, So that's one part of my practice. And then the other intervention I was thinking about was I have a collaborative practice with another artist, Oisa Duvernay, and we started out a project where, so we lived in the same building for 20 years. And about 10 years ago, we started making art together just in our apartments. And we would have conversations, and we thought that it was that through making and talking, we sort of moved or interacted with each other in a different way. And we thought, well, what would happen if we took this outside to our neighbors? And we were both very much coming from, a teaching artist sort of practice as well, so we thought what would happen if we did these art workshops on the street. And so in 2010, we just took out a table and a tent and art materials and started inviting people to do stuff with us. And, we found that people would come up to us, they'd be like, oh, what organization are you from? And we do this right in front of our building. We're like, oh, we're not from any organization, we're just your neighbors. And I felt like that really changed how people saw what we were doing. And so every year we go out there and do that. And then another way that the project's evolved is that we make these fence weavings. So there's a chain link fence on our block, and we have been weaving different messages into the fence. And it's really been a really interesting way to get to know people differently. People will be like, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? Why does it say that? And so it just opens up all these possibilities for having discussions with people. And I guess, just to linking it to the theme, one of the themes that we work with is this idea of gentrification, and how gentrification is really, it's violence against people of color and violence against poor people. And that one way that it works is that it really isolates people from one another. And it also creates a lot of mistrust, and also causes a lot of over-policing and makes it so that people of color can't be on the street. So part of the idea of the project is to bring people, have people be on the street, have people be able to have conversations on the street, and make that like a generative and creative place to be and like, you know, take back some space on the street.
My name is Arnaldo Morales. My work is like interactive sculptures.
You're supposed to stand right here, put your back over this, like this, you know, and play with this. I have cases where people physically punch me because they get really scared or they get, you know, a little hurt or something. Don't be nervous. Okay. Here is how you control, okay?
I've been working with the theme of violence for a little time, not a little time, but I started my work because with the concept of like making like an interactive object for the public, and then I start with mixing my work with my environment. At first, I used to do, you know, like maybe like work that it was, you know, like powered by light, by electricity, by water. But then I start like challenging the audience with it. I try to push or maybe I don't know, motivate anyone who try to get close to my work. So in 2003, I make a show in response of Bush War in Afghanistan, the first one after 9/11, called Weapons of Mass Seduction. And I built like 24 sex toys, but more in a sense of weapons, because the war, I think the war was called weapon. You know, the concept was called Weapons of Mass Destruction. You know, and I twisted with the Weapons of Mass Seduction. So I did like a maybe like a between kind of a demonstration of sex toys, and then like two models demonstrating the work to the people in the show. What I would like to combine with this conversation is a show that I'm making right now. I've been working for a few years. The idea, and it's about the police enforcement to black and brown people, and maybe the bystanders that get in between. But I've been making these nightsticks, these dancing nightsticks, that is related with maybe when you see a movie from the 50s, a police in a parade playing with a nightstick. You know, the nightstick will have like a little stream, and they will play and look at the people, and at the same time you will see the majorettes, you know, marching, doing almost the same thing. So I'm trying to combine that concept with what is happening now, which doesn't match. But I'm working with this. I'm working with this concept because it's a problem. It's an ongoing problem that instead of stop because it's being watched, is increasing, and we all know that there's something wrong about, you know, in the way the police are trained to interact with people.
My name is Alejandro de la Guerra. I'm from Nicaragua. I come from Managua. My work, it's about the investigation about the aesthetic of the power.
Alejandro de la Guerra es uno de los artistas nicaragüenses que llevó su creatividad hasta Costa Rica como parte de la 10ª Bienal Centroamericana. El nicaragüense presentó en el evento Juegos de Guerra en Loop, una obra que habla de los ciclos del poder y la conquista. El proyecto consistió en un carrusel de escala real que el público podía interactuar, dándole vuelta para que gire. Según De la Guerra, el carrusel fue un invento bélico para enseñarles a los soldados a matar a la caballería y viceversa. Si hacían la técnica, le daban vuelta al carrusel hasta que se lograra el objetivo.
I am make a performance and a sculpture, and I am working with monuments, and I am make some intervention in the monuments with my body, and also I have a performance that I shot with the slingshot with monuments, but with quartzos and crystal, you know. The other work is about La Caída was when the revolution Sandinista born in 1979. It was the people falling the monument of the dictator Somoza. And that image for me was very, very present in my mind, the history, you know. So I thought that will be a good idea to make another show or performance or monument to take the dictator. In this moment, we have other dictators. So I made a sculpture, like it's a replica, and invite two people to fall in the monument. This process was very interesting because I work with some sculpture people that working with the government. You know, they make the symbols of the government. You know, so for me it was a good idea to invite the people and construct and to make the sculpture with these guys. And after falling, you know. The other project was, the name is La Piñata. La Piñata is the name that the people say for after the revolution that lost the government of the revolutionaries. They take some bienes, the goods, and the people say this La Piñata, you know, because it's like the symbology that you invite your friends for you brought the symbol, and after you take. So for me, that is the topic that the people don't talk, you know, in Nicaragua, because it's like a taboo. So I make a big a piñata, invite two people to come into the performance, but I changed the roles. No, the people all the time was like with
Blindfold.
and they don't see the performance, only to listen, and so it was very violent and very sensitive that I broke the piñata, and the people don't see the project, the process.
It's funny, when I was in like not high school but middle school or something, in school for us in Puerto Rico, a piñata is when una piñata, right? Is when your friends beat you up in a friendly way. Like for a little while, and then we all still friends. Yeah. That they pick you, and
Yeah.
So let's talk about your work, because I feel working with violin to me is easier than than trying to make something peaceful. Sometimes I try to do something peaceful, and I find that it's impossible for me to do it. I mean, I like, for example, to provoke, to confront, let's say maybe to make you happy, but even in a aggressive way in some ways.
Or it's inciting,
inciting. Yeah.
Or,
But making something peaceful, making something peaceful means that you maybe have to leave. Your state of mind have to be like, you may like almost trying to train yourself to be that way. You know, like try to behave calm. Try to whatever you make, you know, with some, you know, in a delicate way, for example. And I feel like, I mean, it's interesting to me because it's all, you know, all we live in right now as a society is like, you know, is like open Facebook and then see these violent images, and then we get almost like unsensitized to it, you know, like almost like used to it, to see so much violence and not responding, not, you know, we don't cry, we just see it, and sometimes we laugh about it. I mean, not me, but
I was thinking like I remember I saw a work of yours that was the prison trays, I think, the metal plates, they were trays, right, from.
Yeah, they're like
the
dining, commercial dining.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the sound of it was just so like intense and aggressive, and visually it was like scary to look at it. And I was thinking about that as what you were saying, like the opposite of sort of something like painting, right? Which is sort of inherently very quiet. That's like one of the inherent properties of painting in a way, is its silence. And then that machine sort of has this as an inherent property, this like very aggressive sound and very physical immediacy. And sort of, yeah, and that painting does often create a space where it invites contemplation. It invites a sort of almost uncanny silence. And yeah, and like harnessing that is very tricky because it can be mute, and it can be sort of whatever the audience wants it to be. It can, you know, be above your couch and it's fine, you know, and it could be like a Goya or something where people are getting shot, and it's just.
Yeah, I think Goya is more violent than me in some kind of way. You know, you know, like it's like looking at people in a meat grinder or something. Mm-hmm. But I mean, that piece was more related to I studied in public school in the island. I came here when I was like 28. So I grew up over there, and those traits were the ones that I used from first grade to high school. So to me, I mean, I know they're used everywhere, like, you know, schools, prisons, whatever. But to me, it was more about an object that it was so familiar to me.
I actually find your work to be super interesting as well, for the exact opposite reason, right? So I think about this a lot. Right after the election, I went to this artist talk, and there was sort of this discussion about, like, what do we do as artists, you know, after this, like, horrific thing has happened that will continue to be horrible for a very long time, right? And the answer was sort of like, you do what you do, right? We can't just change the way that we make work. We make it in response to these things, whether it's quiet, whether it's loud, whether it's violent or nonviolent or whatever that is. And I think that ultimately, like, you and I have very different approaches to that, which I think is really important, to have like two different angles to come at this from. For me, I feel like, you know, especially after the election, before the election as well, but especially after the election, something was triggered in me where I was like, I can only take in so much of this, and this can't come out in my work. I have to make work that counters what I'm experiencing and what I'm feeling. And I think that was sort of my offering as an artist, was like, how can I make safe spaces? Like, no one feels safe. How can I make spaces that are safe? but how can I talk about something that I care about, you know? And for me, I think about, you know, when I think about Palestine, which is something I'm very familiar with and grew up understanding a lot about, and I follow pretty closely. It's something that in the United States we don't talk about. We don't talk about Palestine. We never talk about Palestine. So I was like, okay, there's something that I can talk about that I know well, that I can infuse in my work. This is it, you know, something I care about. But I also think it's super important to make work that's violent. I think there's also something to that. And like for me, when I saw your work, I was attracted to using these like really heavy, potentially dangerous objects, because I would never go for those items. Like that's not something I would pick up. But I'm really intrigued by how that's utilized and what that makes you feel when you experience it. And I definitely think that there's something about your work that when you feel it, you do sort of feel shook. You don't really know what's going to happen. You're kind of almost a little bit scared of what might happen to you next, especially with these like sort of moving mechanical objects. So I think that's really powerful.
Thank you. I mean, my work for me is more like my own therapy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, something that I was thinking about, I mean, just in this conversation was that idea of like, you know, tearing things down versus building, right? So that if you're thinking about things that you'd like to change, or are you thinking about all the things that are wrong or hard or, you know, distracting or have us like completely numb, you know, like how do you work towards dismantling those things while at the same time figuring out, okay, if that goes away, what do we have, you know, or how do you start to think about what it is that you want or what it is that you want things to be like or look like or whatever, you know. So there's this book that's been really important to my work. It's Freedom Dreams by Robin D.G. Kelley, you know, and he talks about the power of the imagination and the imagination as a political work and as important political work because, you know, one of the things that oppression does is limit our ability to dream, you know, so that you can only imagine what's already happening and you can't think about, you know, something else. So it seems like that those things it seems like all of that is sort of like at play, I think, in a lot of the things that we've been saying.